my late mid-20s and the early mid-90s, I decided that I wanted to be an elephant trainer when I grew up. So I was working mostly stateside in a USAID-sponsored project to bring clean water to Kazakhstan for the first time. Pipes were built, water flowed, and there was much rejoicing. After 2 years, though, my government contractor company's contract came to an end, and I cast about for what to do next. So I'm sitting at work one day, catching a wave on our antediluvian dial-up internet, and I came across a training program for exotic animal, training at Moore Park Junior College in Thousand Oaks, California. Go Raiders. I filled out and submitted my application that very day, and a few weeks later, when the blissfully anticipated fat college envelope arrived, I knew that I'd been accepted to the program. The job ended, we blew up our office, said goodbye, and I loaded up the 1984 Cadillac Sedan DeVille and headed for Ventura County. To the amazement and wonder of my inner class clown, I found I was a much better college student the second time around. So 2 years later, AAS degree in hand, I moved on to elephant care internships at zoos and sanctuaries in Arkansas and Tennessee and back here in DC, while applying with the reckless abandon of the newly minted for elephant jobs I was shamefully underqualified for on 5 continents. When the much coveted fat email arrived, it was the early 21st century now, after all, I found that I had been hired by a private Thai elephant camp. I sold my stocks and socks in Sedan DeVille and set out for Southeast Asia, where I'd be managing the camp's growing volunteer program and giving actual elephant taxi rides in the actual Thai outback to actual tourists. And if they were puzzled or nonplussed or perplexed to have a phalang, which is Thai for white boy, as a mahout or elephant driver, well, they would just have to go ahead and get over it. So 8 hours after crawling from the wreckage of my 22-hour international flight to the Kingdom of Thailand, I woke to meet my elephantine partner in those taxi rides, Yui, whose name they told me meant fat. Now, I'd grown up hearing Gordo for the husky fella on the soccer team, and I mean, she was an elephant, so I tried to call her fat as a native would, with a smile and with respect, and she seemed to be okay with it. Job 1 was to take Yui down to the Lopburi River, which ran beside the camp, for a morning bath, head to toe to elephant lady parts. Hello? Did we just meet? So, down to the river we went, but this whole get off a plane, get on an elephant thing reminded me of when my dad taught me to ride a bike with a push downhill, or set me behind the wheel of our 1980 forest green VW Dasher diesel with the ink still wet on my learner's permit. If there had been a stop sign to hit that first morning in Thailand, I would have hit it. But we made it into the water, where Yui tried to dunk me a few times for a few weeks, and the other mahouts, who could balance atop their elephants' heads while drinking 90 proof rice whiskey from refilled Red Bull bottles at 6 in the morning as the elephants submerged themselves in the water, just looked on and laughed. Side note, amidst the swirling, slow eddies of the ancient, leisurely Lopburi River, elephants totally shit up the water. Yeah, that'd be the water I was being dragged into, and why they stood on their heads. Several months later, when I could back Yui into a parking space without even a glance at the rearview mirror, or roast my fat elephant and drunken comrades in Thai, and even do the cool head balancing thing, Mr. Sampat, the camp's owner, decided to break us up for a while and paired me up with a 12-year-old male elephant named Dodo. Now, his version of hazing was to charge at me while I stood on this concrete water trough trying to give him a drink. Thanks, right? So I'm standing on this trough, I'm a little bit above him, and he whips around, and elephants have this bump in the middle of their forehead. It hits me right in the gut, and I flew 10 feet back through the air. It being the rainy season, I landed in a lovely little vernal pool. I got back up, and like they tell you to do when your bike hits a stop sign, I got back on. And that evening at dinner, I shared the experience with Mr. Sampat, who laughed gales of laughter and exclaimed, "You lucky you no die." Although somebody later told me that Yui, my first elephant, had actually killed a dude at the camp where she worked before. So thanks again. Nonetheless, in the interest of my not dying, Yui and I were reunited, and it felt so good. Now, every couple of weeks, the elephants and the mahouts would get a day off to camp wild and graze. And it was in one of these Yule Gibbons moments that another mahout made for me my very first red ant egg omelet. Now, I don't know, but I think the elephants probably enjoyed their whole survivor, wild paleo, or maybe Pleistocene diet a little bit more than I did that day. But back at work, sometimes the tourist would take me back to the beginning of my journey and ask, why elephants? And I'd tell them my folks took me on an elephant ride when I was 6, and I've been hooked ever since. So later on, I moved on to stints with the circus and the zoo and giving elephant back tours in Botswana, training baby elephants in Zimbabwe, and then looping back around to Indochina to manage a camp in Laos and work on a book. But every time I went back to that Thai elephant camp, when she'd see me, Yui would do this rumble thing that elephants do that I'm going to try to show you now. It goes like this. She would see me and she would just rumble and flap her ears and reach out her trunk for these Purina monkey chow biscuits I would give her as a reward sometimes. And look at me as if to say, I never forget. And I'm not gonna kill you. Today. Call me fat again. But when the mini bike I was riding was hit by a 10-ton truck on one of Thailand's treacherous throughways, and I spent 2 months in the hospital, I knew it was time to go home. So in the middle of the so-called crisis, I called up my old boss and ate shit, and 8 short years later, was back in a not so dissimilar cubicle at a very fucking similar government purchasing job. So, do dreams ever come true the way you think they will? And what's the best place to be? Is it falling off an elephant's head into a river of shit halfway around the world? Maybe. Or is it in an air-conditioned office, standing around one of those water coolers without a bottle on top? Where does the water come from? It's magic. Swapping stories. This much I know. Around the water cooler, I always win.